Thank you, Chairman McCall and Ranking Member Mix for holding today's hearing. I want to thank General Milley and General McKenzie for coming before our committee with your testimonies. And I do also want to welcome the Gold Star families and veterans. Thank you for your service. Following the chaotic withdrawal of from Afghanistan, President Biden stated that he owes no apologies for how the withdrawal was conducted. I disagree. To this date, we're still unclear on how many Americans were left behind in Afghanistan and remain there, not to mention Afghan allies that helped our service members with translation services and intelligence gathering. That could have been prevented if the withdrawal was not carried out in a way that was dismissive of advice coming from the DoD's top leadership. President Biden also promised in an ABC News interview just a few days after the Taliban takeover of Kabul that if there are American citizens left, we're going to stay until we get them all out. Well, that's not happened. So General Milley and General McKenzie, did you consider this promise an order from the president?
No, the ABC interview, I wouldn't consider that an order. We receive orders from the White House in formal ways. It has been like this for decades. Typically, they are signed by typically the National Security Advisor to the President, and then that's transmitted to the Secretary of Defense, chain of command, and then the Joint Staff and the Chairman will take those orders, turn them into military orders to transmit to the combatant commanders. So I wouldn't consider an ABC interview or any other means of immediate communication as a quote-unquote an order.
General McKenzie?
I think General Milley described it exactly correct.
Was there any contingency planning with the State Department to ensure that no citizens would be left behind?
After we departed on the end of August.
Asking prior to the withdrawal, was there contingency planning with the State Department?
So we always planned for capacities. For example, from the very beginning, CENTCOM worked with a number of about 150,000. That's how many people we thought, that goes back to June of 2020. That was the number that we thought would have to come out. So the Department of Defense's responsibility there is to make sure you got the airplanes to move them, you can process them. But it's up for the Department of State to say who's coming out, how you're going to categorize those people, how you're going to sort them, and how you're going to get them there. And that's when I would talk about the velocities, the different velocities of the two departments. We were pretty straightforward with our ability to do that, but we're dependent on the Department of State actually to make those decisions that turn our ability into actual movement of human beings.
Sure. So we talked about how President promised that during that ABC News interview, but when did you realize that President Biden's promise would be broken?
I'm sorry, just help me with that.
When did you realize that President's promise of getting every one of the American citizens left in Taliban will get them out? When did you?
I would say by mid-July of 2021, I was concerned, given events in Afghanistan, about the state of the Department of State's planning and their ability to execute a NEO. Now, I never thought we'd get everybody out. I always thought there would be some, you're never going to attain perfection there, but you'd want to get that number as small as possible. So I knew there would be people left behind. We weren't going to be able to get everybody out, but you wanted to get as close to zero as you can.
Were you told by that same administration just days later to leave Americans behind if it meant getting out by August 31st?
No, I was never told that, but I would share with you my advice in late August was we needed to get out by the 31st. If we did not leave by the 31st, it was clear to me from our intelligence reporting and a number of other sources, we would have been fighting the Taliban. So I thought you want to get out by the 31st and then resort to diplomatic means to bring your citizens that don't get out by the 31st out. Otherwise, you're going to have to pour thousands more forces into Afghanistan just to stay there and permanently impair your opportunity to get citizens out, not to mention the tens of thousands of at-risk Afghans that you would like to get out that are actually, of course, at much higher risk.
Let me ask General Milley my last question. You previously testified that during the NEO, you and General McKenzie both recommended against keeping U.S. forces in Afghanistan past August 31st. So why would you recommend this, even with hundreds of Americans and tens and thousands of Afghan allies left behind?
Well, for the very same reasons that John McKenzie just outlined. I think to keep them past the 31st, you're already at a very small number. You would have had to increase that number by tens of thousands in order to stay there and continue fighting now what would be the Taliban. As far as the American citizens, it wasn't clear then, and it's still not clear to me, what those numbers are or were. And that was never clarified by anyone in the State Department, exactly how many, where they are, who they are they out in Herat, are they down in Kandahar? We can't, unless you put tens of thousands of troops in there, we cannot be bouncing around a country that's at war and trying to look for this person and that person. It's just not realistic. It's not a feasible course of action. And by the end of August, especially after the 26th Abbey Gate, absolutely not feasible. So at that point in time, your choices are extend well into September, October. You could look forever because you don't even know what number you're looking for, and you don't even know where they're at. So those weren't feasible or acceptable courses of action at the time, although I do understand the human desire, but didn't know numbers, didn't know necessarily where they were, and so on and so forth. So not a realistic option.
Got it. Well, thank you very much. My
No,
time
his time's expired.